This episode of the Fandalorian podcast is brought to you by the Adler Real Estate Team. If you live in New York, anywhere between Manhattan and Montauk, and are looking to buy or sell, you need to call the Adler Real Estate Team. This real estate company is run by a husband and wife duo that, in addition to being real estate agents, are also a public school teacher and a police officer. It is a family-run business that gives you the attention and care you need when you are about to make one of the most important decisions of your life. And I know from experience. Also, if you mention that you are a fan of the Fandalorians, they will be able to get you up to $2,000 back at closing. It doesn't matter if you are buying or listing. So, if you are buying or selling anywhere from Manhattan to Montauk, call the Adler Real Estate Team at 631-384-6372. Or check out the website at adlerrealestateteam.com. Mention the Fandalorians and save today.
This podcast is a production of Unfiltered Studios. If you would like to know more about joining Unfiltered Studios, please visit our website at unfpod.com for more information.
Welcome back, class. On today's episode, from an iconic toy line to an animated series, and eventually to live-action films, we are going to discuss 60 years of G.I. Joe. All this and more in a 60 years of G.I. Joe, now you know, and knowing is half the battle, episode of The Fandalorians. Teachers by day, nerds by night.
That is the bell. Class is in session. Welcome to the Fandalorians podcast. Teachers by day, nerds by night. Proud part of the Unfiltered Studios podcasting network. We are the #1 public school teacher pop culture fandom podcast in the country. We join you each and every week, Jace, really kind of, I don't know, to give you the latest news, lively debates and reviews in the world of entertainment with a cool teacher theme. The three of us are lifelong friends. Hopefully, after how many times I've caused us to not do this podcast, but we'll get that in a second.
For
you
now.
get the banter, you get the trash talking. I feel like it's coming soon. Only friends can. Email us at thefandaloriansmailbag@gmail.com. Text us at 631-494-3632. Since we get new listeners all the time, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mr. Richardson, 4th grade teacher and the man who is to blame for the delays on this episode. I didn't write this, but it's factually correct.
See, I wrote this knowing that you wouldn't look at it beforehand. And I think halfway through that sentence, you're like, oh, this is blaming me.
And what's funny about this whole episode, it's a special G.I. Joe themed episode. I'm the one that kind of
Spearheaded.
But I pitched it to you guys. Who's your favorite character? We started talking. Next thing, we did some fact checking and realized it's the 60th anniversary, which really should be covered more. Like, no one's talking about this. I'm kind of surprised this is kind of slipping by.
Only the greatest podcast in the universe is covered.
Yeah, we're going to do it first, and then we're going to see it like spill out all over the place, but it's us. We did it first. I delayed recording this maybe 4 or 5 times, sometimes a day ahead of time, sometimes like 6 minutes beforehand. Here we are. We're doing it, finally getting it done. Co-teaching with me, the man whose wife just got a little bit nerdier, Mr. McDonald. Lawrence,
all right, well, this one is actually for Mr. G. It was a couple of days ago, and all of a sudden I'm just doing something, and Lauren's watching TV in the bedroom, and I walk through, and you know what was on?
What?
The Lord of the Rings.
Oh.
What she decided to do.
Wild.
Yeah, she decided she is going to watch the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Interesting.
And I was like, oh my God, you got to tell Charlie. And she's like, I'll wait for Charlie to come back to work to talk about it.
All right.
But here's the caveat. She's watching the Lord of the Rings extended edition.
Oh, all right.
So, and what she's doing is she's doing like what we all do kind of nowadays. She's turning it into a mini series.
You have to.
She watches it like 45 minutes blocks, and she's like asking me all these questions. And I'm like, I am not the Fandalorian that you need to be asking these questions for.
Wrong person.
And she doesn't know the names yet, but it's really funny. And she's like, Gandalf's used to be his friend, just betrayed him. What was his name? And then I started to realize that all the names, it's like there's Sauron and Saruman, and I'm just like, it's really confusing. This has got to be
Those are the only two similar questions. It's not like,
but it starts that way. Or you're like, all of the names going to kind of rhyme?
Oh no, well, no, it's just those two characters. It's not like Game of Thrones and House of Dragons, where every single person's name is Edgard or Egard or something that is like 2 letters changed.
But having Sauron and Saruman, that would be like, if I'm the bad guy, my name's Mr. McDonald, and then my sidekick is Mr. McDowell. But I thought you'd be very proud of her.
I am. I'm very proud. I'm curious to know what she thinks of it when it's all said and done.
Charlie, do you know what is the length of all 3 movies with the extended edition altogether?
It's probably like 12 hours.
Yeah, it is 726 minutes. It is 12 hours and 6 minutes.
Oh, I was pretty close with that one.
Yeah, seriously. You should play a lot of it today.
Yeah.
Our other co-teacher, the man who has finished the first 2 books in the Empirium series.
Empirium.
Yeah, sure. Fourth Wing and Iron Flame by Rebecca
Yarros.
Mystery Book.
So this is a book series that is pretty brand new. The first book came out in 2023. So now it's
Mr. G. I finally finished book 1. I finished Fourth Wing.
Nice. And I just finished the second book, which was Iron Flame. So it all revolves around a 22-year-old heroine named Violet Sorrengail, and she enters the Dragon Riding Academy. So this is a fantasy series. And I'm just looking right now at Goodreads, and it's funny, they have the genres. It says dragons, fiction, audiobook, fantasy romance, which is now called romantasy.
Yes, I did notice that.
Magic. It says new adult, young adult, adult, and high fantasy. And I'm looking at that young adult and being like,
it's not really young adult.
No, it is not a YA book at all.
No,
It has the feeling when you first start reading it or listening to the book, it completely feels like a YA book.
Yeah, it starts like Harry Potter, and then it ends like Harry Potter fan fiction.
Yeah, so it is, Jimmy, it is like Harry Potter and House of Dragons pushed into one. And as you're listening, it has a lot of elements. You can tell she was obviously a fan of Harry Potter, Dungeons and Dragons. I feel like there's some Dragonlance in there. All sorts of maybe Avatar, The Last Airbender, and Korra. There's a lot of little things in there that makes me feel like, oh, she pulled this from here. She pulled that from there. For anyone that wants to pick this up and read it, the book 3 is coming out in January. But I thought it was great, except the spicy parts of it are pretty graphic. So I was surprised and taken aback when that part came up, and I was like, oh, ooh.
Mr. G, you texted me and you were like, when you get to chapter, I think it was 30 or 31, you goes, just make sure you're wearing headphones.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, all right. And you're like, oh man, holy, whoa.
But I really enjoyed the series, and I know Amazon has the rights to it as a TV thing. And I'd like to talk more about that one time, but we have an action-packed episode to get to. So
how can you support the show? With Christmas just around the corner. Thanks, McDonald. Check out the merch at tpublic.com. I'm selling this super hard to get the hoodies, to get the t-shirts. All the proceeds go to Laney's Legacy of Hope, which is a nonprofit organization that has fundraisers and activities to provide assistance to families with someone suffering from pediatric cancer. Volunteer-run program, no CO, no board. 100% of what you donate goes directly to the families. Our cut goes to Laney's Legacy of Hope, and check them out at laneyslegacy.org.
Oh, Mr. Richardson, do you know that everything is on sale at TeePublic this week?
Is it really? That's great.
Yeah. I just went on because I want to see what do we offer, because I was like, you know what I kind of want?
What?
I want a Fandalorian's Christmas ornament.
Do we have that?
Oh.
And they don't. They only offer, clothing. Because of that, you can get one of the t-shirts for $16.
There
nice.
you go.
Downtown Port Jeff, if you're on the island, Red Shirt Comics for all your comic needs. Mr. Darby says hello, or support your local comic shops. That's cool too. And if you enjoy our nonsense, We get new episodes all the time, and I think we're about to get a lot on this one. Follow us on our socials, Instagram at Fandalorians.podcast, Twitter at Fandalorianspod, TikTok at the Fandalorians Podcast. We got to get right into it, but let me explain how this all happened, because a lot's happened in the past few minutes, especially. First of all, I have a student in my room. Her name's Olive. And at one point, I made a reference. Maybe I made a G.I. Joe reference, something like that. And she said her dad liked G.I. Joe. And I said, oh, what's your dad's favorite character? She said, I'll find out. She came back with a list. Then I reached out to you guys. We started talking, and it just one thing led to another. And we end up doing a podcast because it's the 60th anniversary of G.I. Joe. I was the assistant coach for the Harlem Wizards, which is like the Harlem Globetrotters versus our local school recently. And that parent came up to me, hey, when's the podcast coming out? And I said, hey, I don't know, Mr. G keeps canceling. I don't know. He's messing the whole thing up. I know. He needs to get his head in the game. Now, it's been my fault, completely my fault. Our dad reached out, did a voicemail for us. So we're going to play it now.
Hey, what's going on? This is Derek. I'm really excited. You guys are doing an episode on G.I. Joes and G.I. Joe lore and all that. Big fan of the show growing up. I loved how the guns were like laser guns. Duke was really cool, and seeing a character or a figure that I had in the show was like wild. I was a big fan of weird figures as an 80s kid. The little guys. Chuckles is a big favorite of mine. Just a huge fan. Growing up, I was a huge nerd, really into it, and then of course the Fensler film YouTube videos. Those were funny. I love G.I. Joes, and I look forward to hearing what you guys are going to talk about. Thank you. Have a good one. Yo, Joe.
What a perfect way to end a voicemail.
Exactly.
Like, can we just do that in regular life?
I think I'm going to do that as my sign-off.
Yeah.
On my emails now. Yo, Joe. Mr. G.
All right. So then it got weirder. So then I went onto the Twitter devices, the social medias, and I sent out like, hey, listen, I'm doing the 60th anniversary of the show of G.I. Joe. We're recording a special podcast tomorrow. Any stories, favorite characters, or moments you want us to mention on the podcast? Gave him a number, blah, blah, blah. So David reaches out, David Owens, friend of the show, super fan. He says, I don't know, maybe you can get Sergeant Slaughter on here. And he added Sergeant Slaughter. I thought that was funny until 2 seconds ago when Sergeant Slaughter actually responded to the message himself.
Nice.
And Sergeant Slaughter, who is now an official, and I'm not making this part up, friend of the podcast because he's officially following us now.
Nice.
So I wrote to Sergeant Slaughter, like after David Owens, I wrote, hey, Sarge, are you interested in having a conversation about something other than wrestling? Talking about your experience of being a member of G.I. Joe team and how your DNA was used to create Serpentor. Then I hashtagged G.I. Joe hash. Well, that's what I swear. I wrote it and just replied it. He reposted it, and he literally followed the show. So he's officially a friend of the podcast, not like the fake ones we come up with.
Gotcha.
And then none of them are fake, Mr. Richardson.
No, of course not. And now a whole bunch of other people who clearly follow Sergeant Slaughter are liking it too. So listen, Sarge, if you actually listen to this when it comes out, because I'm sending this to you immediately, come on the show. We could talk about not wrestling, talk about being a member of G.I. Joe. Hey. So look, a lot's going on, guys. We got a building meeting. We got a whole bunch of stuff to get to. Sarge, you're out there. Come on anytime. But for us, it's time for the building meeting.
Come on down to the building meeting. Come on down today. There's many things to talk about. Yes, you have to stay. Urgent things to discuss. So lose that face of disgust. No, this couldn't be an email. So come on down today. Building meeting today. Oh yeah, it's the building meeting today.
All right, guys, it's building meeting time. We're doing centers. For those who don't know what centers are, in the classroom, centers are different activity stations or areas set up around the room where students work on specific tasks. Each center is focused on a different topic or activity. Students have a hands-on, engaging way to practice and learn. 9-10 minutes, we'll figure it out as we go along for each of these centers, but we're going to have centers today for different aspects of G.I. Joe. So we have some organization because this can go crazy really fast. We're going to talk about action figures, the animated series, the theme songs, Of course,
This might be our first 3-hour episode if we don't stop.
I know. The public service announcements, animated movie, the live action movie, and of course the comics. Okay, first center, guys, action figures. A little background information. The original 12-inch line, 1964 to 1976, introduced by Hasbro. G.I. Joe was the first action figure and became a global phenomenon. Initially, these 12-inch figures represented branches of the U.S. military. Get the detailed uniforms, the weapons, the accessories. The term action figure was coined because doll was deemed unsuitable for a boy's toy. To this day, I say I have action figures in my classroom and not toys, not dolls.
Correct.
In 82, Hasbro brought them back. 3 3/4-inch figure accompanied by a storyline, right? Joe battles now against the villainous Cobra organization. You got Duke, you got Snake Eyes, Scarlet, Cobra Commander, Destro, each with unique bios, backstories written on the cards. Popularity off the charts, just skyrocketed, driven by its ability to immerse fans in like a larger fictional universe. All right, guys, thoughts on the action figures?
So I'll go first. I mean, obviously, I played with G.I. Joe. What I thought was super interesting is they went from the big giant figures and then they went to the little figures. And what I thought was really smart about that is, number one, the original big G.I. Joes, it was too close to Barbie. It still kind of felt like a doll. And then when they went smaller, they were smart because now they can sell vehicles.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was a game changer. Now, it's funny. I was looking through a list of like the best action figures. And I know Charlie and I, we were talking about that. We were saying, what was the best action figure versus who was our favorite character? Because those are two very different questions.
Yes.
But it's fascinating. And then there's a bunch of characters here that you totally forgot about. Like one of my favorite action figures, you remember, because it was Mutt and Junkyard.
Yep.
Because it was like getting two action figures because you got the dog as well. And, you know, and the early figures, they were all very kind of like one note, they very easy to tell apart. But my favorite action figure, probably of all time, is the Bat figure, because I just thought it was cool looking.
Because he had those accessories with his hands.
Yeah, and you could put
reach the hands
anything
out.
on there. And also, that was the only one that you could get multiple of, and it still fits the story. Because, you get two flints, and you're like, what am I going to do with this?
Lifeline coming with a gun always bothered me deep down, not going to lie.
Who?
Lifeline, the medic who
he
never
did?
got the gun but came with a gun in the pack. Yes, it was a big
Technically, that
thing.
was. I think the way they said it is it wasn't a gun. It was like a dart gun or something like that. That's the way they kind of like worked their way around it.
As in they forgot.
I'm not playing with a pacifist.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to talk about G.I. Joe, I've said on this podcast many times that He-Man Masters of the Universe was my number one toy story things I was into. Number two was G.I. Joe. And the big reason, of course, and it just has to be said, there was a black figure. And honestly, there were none ever before Stalker came out. I take this back. They had an original 12-inch figure that was black that came out in the 60s. But then that was the first ever toy that was black, period. The next one, obviously, when Stalker came out at the time, the 80s, now obviously I wasn't younger, but when the 80s hit and G.I. Joe hit, all the other toy lines, there was no black characters, Master Universe, Voltron. You just pretended someone was black in Transformers. But
There was
Stalker
Orlando
came out.
Calrissian.
Yeah, that's different. He's from a movie series. That's different. For the animated cartoon and the toy, Stalker was first. He was my favorite. When I looked up his real name because I remembered reading the card and knew his card better than anyone, but now I forgot. Lorenzo Wilkinson from Detroit. The cards were so detailed. You guys remember how detailed those cards are. He was a Stalker, was a leader of an urban street gang in Detroit before he joined the military. He was in the same crew that trained with Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes in the comics. Again, he was a major character in the comic books, a major character in the toy line. They didn't do a lot with him on the cartoon show, but he was definitely my favorite.
I forgot how detailed the back cards were. Like I remember Zartan, and they were I'm sorry, not Zartan, Dr. Mindbender, and they wanted to make sure that he was a bad guy. And so the detail they put in there is he used grape soda as mouthwash. And it was such a specific and odd detail that you're like, yeah, that's what a bad guy would do, right?
Right, just listen to this real quick. I cut and paste part of Stalker's card. This is how detailed. This goes to your point. Leader of the gang in Detroit before he joined the military. Graduated top of his class in basic combat training and advanced infantry. He received special training in the USA Army Language School, fluent in Spanish, French, Arabic, Swahili, served in the LRRP as Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, qualified jump instructor. Then they give you the weapons: M14, M16, M1911, auto pistol, the grease gun, the pulverizer, fluent in the languages, commanding people. Like, they give you everything in one little card. It was incredible detail.
For me growing up, my first toys that I remember owning were I had gotten Star Wars. And Star Wars are those 4-inch, 3 1/4 sized characters. And then my next set of toys were He-Man, and those were much bigger. And I just remember once feeling like they were too big. Like, He-Mans were cool, but they were just big and you kind of like took up a lot of space. Where Star Wars, they didn't take as much space, so you can kind of hold a bunch of them, stick them in your pockets, and go wherever you wanted to go. But then when G.I. Joe came out, they were like 1,000 times better because it was like they were articulated. And that was something you didn't have in Star Wars. Star Wars were straight-legged, straight-armed. Some of their heads moved. But like G.I. Joe had their heads moved, their waists moved, their knees bent, their elbows moved, their shoulders moved. So they had a lot of mobility. So to me as a kid, I loved playing with G.I. Joe simply because it had that articulation that Star Wars and He-Man never had. So that was really cool that I really liked. And then a lot of fun that I had was going, when we were doing this, I went back to the Sears catalog online and I went back through all the years and just looking at all the toys. And I'm like, oh man, I had this guy, I had that guy, I had this. Oh, I wanted that. So like, I remember having Wild Bill's helicopter. I had the G.I. Joe helicopter. One of those toys from that early line that I always wanted was a Hiss tank. I always wanted the Hiss tank because I thought those were like the coolest things. My friend, and then eventually as the years went on, I had gotten the hydrofoil, which was like a boat. I had like the water moccasin, which was another boat. Yeah. But my friend Jordan had like every G.I. Joe character like toy. So I used to go to his house. We used to play like all the time with he had hundreds of figures. But the one thing that I was always, I guess I'll use the word jealous of, I had this other friend, Tom. I wasn't jealous of this, but he had the USS Flag. And it was
the aircraft carrier, right?
The aircraft carrier. It was huge. He had it in his bedroom. He had it on his sawhorse on like a big like plank. The one thing that I always thought was the coolest thing is he had a handful of Cobra Vipers and Cobra Bats. Like, I only ever had one. I had one of every character, even like stormtroopers from Star Wars. I just had one. I had one stormtrooper. I had one snowtrooper. And, once they got taken out, there was no reinforcements. But I just remember Tom had like handfuls of like Vipers. And I always thought it was the coolest thing.
You have to have more bad guys than good guys. If not, the good guys just look like bullies.
Did you guys mail in to get the hooded Cobra Commander? I remember that I mailed in to get the hooded Cobra Commander, and that was the only Cobra Commander.
I mailed in to get Refrigerator Perry.
Oh, see, I missed out on that. I just remember I wanted him. Friend Jordan had him, but I'd never got him.
I did all the mail-in. So I got the Cobra Commander with the hood. I got Refrigerator Perry. I got that when you could make a character that was quote-unquote you, but he wore a full body mask, so you couldn't have it with the skin color or anything like that. I forget his name. But that was
underneath, it's you, I swear.
Yeah, that you could write your own story for him. I got that one.
But my favorite, for whatever reason, between like Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, and the original Storm Shadow, from the cartoon that they made a toy, was the dopest looking ninja character ever. But I had the other Storm Shadow that was like white, that had like the gray stripes. He looked like a snow guy. So the toys were the awesomest.
I got the list from Olive's dad of his favorite characters. He is the reason we're doing all this, basically. The top Joes, he has Mainframe, Bazooka, Doc, Footloose, and Lifeline. He also wanted us to know these lists are subject to change due to nostalgia, of course.
Yeah.
And for the top 5 Cobra, Crystal Ball, Toxo Zombie. Crystal Ball is a deep cut, and I remember it.
I got to look that up. I don't know who that is.
You'll know it when you see it. That was a good one. Copperhead, Crocmaster, and Road Pig.
Oh, I had Crocmaster and Road Pig.
Top 5 Joes are like the old school original, like ones you like we remember seeing, and then his villains are like, wait, who's that one again?
Who's the villain? What was the villain's name? Crystal Ball.
My favorite action figure as I got a little bit older was Baroness.
Oh,
because
we're
you're
not gonna
like,
talk about the
"Whoa,
Baroness.
this is interesting." Yeah.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah, you remember that guy. Okay.
Wait,
I
crystal
Yeah.
ball.
he sent me the text. I'm like, wait, I looked it up. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yes, that
My
guy.
friend Jordan had that guy.
Oh yeah. Oh, did you guys know, by the way, before we move on, how much the aircraft carrier cost when it first came out?
Well, how much?
Oh, how much?
$89.99 in the 80s.
Yeah. So it's probably like $200 now.
That's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yo, Joe!
All right, new center guy. Animated series. You have the first animated series that came out in 83 to 86, G.I. Joe, Real American Hero. This is the original. It debuted with a 5-part miniseries in 1983. This led to a full series, ran for 2 seasons, tons of episodes. Then the series ended in 1986, 1989, and kind of came back. It's a continuation, 2 seasons with new episodes and characters. Retained some of the original characters, but it introduced a more colorful, campy style.
This was post the G.I. Joe movie.
They reversed.
Yeah, this is the one that had Serpentor in it. Yeah.
No, Serpentor was in before.
Oh, that's
But
true.
what-
After G.I. Joe the movie.
was-
Yeah.
Cobra Commander came back as a snake person, but he had that different outfit. He had that
Yes,
full
that's right.
body,
Just
and then
to
the
sell
other
more figures.
characters.
And
like-
in episode 1 of this, they turned Serpentor into a pet snake. Cobra came back and flipped Serpentor and locked him up. I actually remember that really well now that you said it. He had the whole gear thing. And of course, G.I. Joe Renegade, 2010 to 2011. It's a complete reboot. Kind of a modernized take on it. The Joes were on the run as fugitives after being framed by Cobra, which poses a powerful corporation in this new reboot. Guys, thoughts on the cartoons, the animated series? Where do you want to go with it?
So I loved watching cartoons. So G.I. Joe cartoon I was all into it. So I watched actually all of these. I watched all of these cartoons, even G.I. Joe Renegades 2010. I watched that as well. And what I loved about G.I. Joe was I loved the idea of the miniseries. So, the very first miniseries that rolled out was they had the mass device. To me, it was they had to adventure, and they fought all over the place to collect all of the stuff that they needed. Then there was the Revenge of Cobra, where they had the Weather Dominator, and then there was the Pyramid of Darkness, and then of course Serpentor Arise. I really like the G.I. Joe series, all of them. They did, though, I want to say, towards the end, get super campy when kind of Duke and General Hawk retired. Or no, General Hawk wasn't in the field anymore. He went strictly behind the desk, and they brought in Captain Gridiron. And that animation from there, they're super campy. I was just actually watching.
You can tell where they started cutting the budget. Yeah.
Yeah, and I still watched it as a kid. I will say this: G.I. Joe did a great job of making the toys look like the TV show.
Yes.
And because it used to bother me with He-Man because of Duncan and no mustache. Ruined it all for me.
My absolute favorite episode of G.I. Joe all time is Cold Slither. For those who never saw it, Cold Slither is an episode of G.I. Joe where there is a band, and I believe the band's name was Cold Slither.
Yeah.
And they had a hit song called Cold Slither. And shockingly, they were secretly Cobra. The secret snake, metaphor. I can't believe we didn't see it earlier. But and their plan is to, I believe it was hypnosis to take over the world. And the song was super catchy.
You gotta rate it on.
We're Cold Slither, you'll be joining us soon. A band of vipers playing our tune. With an iron fist and a reptile's hiss, we shall rule. We're tired of words, we've heard it before. We're not gonna play the game no more. Don't tell us what's right, don't tell us what's wrong. To learn to resist, 'cause Cobra is strong.
I love how the Joes were even into it too.
It shows you how dumb we were as children. I had no idea at the time. You listen to the lyrics, of course it's Cobra. But when
they're adults.
and then it
We
turned
should
out
know
when it's
better.
Cobra, as a kid, I was like, "We what?"
That's
The end of the song, though, the Joes sing their own little song that was not as cool as
No.
Cold Slither.
Good guys don't have good songs.
All right, my favorite episode, which isn't my favorite, but it's my most favorite memory. We used to play G.I. Joe on the playground at Phillips Avenue School. or the school I was at.
Yep. Got to represent Phillips Avenue.
I remember we were in a run where we were playing G.I. Joe outside. Everyone got to be a character, and everyone was pretending to be good guys and bad guys on the entire thing. This is a 1,000% true story and the weirdest thing. So I just chose Dusty because he was new, and it was Dusty, and I knew who he was. That, I kid you not, that night was the episode when I went home, was the episode where Dusty was a traitor. Part one came out. This is true. I'm not making this up. Part one came out. I had been Dusty for like a week now. Part one came out where he was supposedly a traitor. If you didn't see it, there's a 2-part episode where Dusty's apparently a traitor. Turns out he was undercover, and the only one who knew was like Duke, and he gets knocked out. Something like that. So the episode 1 ends with him being a traitor. Episode 2 opens.
Wait, no, Mr. Richardson, that's the G.I. Joe movie.
No, that is definitely an
Oh,
episode.
I thought it was.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, never mind.
I lived it.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It.
Speak your trauma, Jimmy. You're good.
Yeah, at the end of the one, he was a traitor. And so I went to school the next day, and the kids had all seen it. I was like, nah, you're with Cobra now. So I was over with the Cobra kids. I was like, I guess I'm evil now, because I wasn't old enough to process that to fix this the next day. So all we did was play. Honestly, we stood in these little tire things.
Wait, Charlie, can you clip out Mr. Richardson just saying, I guess I'm evil now?
Yeah.
Of course I
need that. That's my ringtone. Then I go home that night, and the second episode comes out, and which is where we find out it was a mistake. Duke was the only one who knew. He was undercover the whole time, and Dusty, turns out, was not a traitor. So the next day, I got to go back with the guy, and the guys were like, "Hey, man, I'm sorry. We saw it. We thought you were a traitor.
We didn't know the script was going to happen that way." Yeah.
But that's what I remember. I remember being a traitor for a day and had to join the bad kids. But then I got to go back to G.I. Joe the following day.
You know what the worst episode was? The Viper is coming.
Oh God.
Oh my God.
I
that episode.
The windows.
Yes.
Oh.
And at the end, it's just some immigrant guy who had a heavy accent from his home country, and he was the window washer to wipe the windows.
Yo, Joe!
Next center, theme songs. What is the best G.I. Joe theme song? We're going to share some of them, right?
Yeah. Now, this is the thing. I did not realize this until afterwards. There's a part in the song where they actually changed the line over the years.
Yo, Joe! We'll fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there. G.I. Joe, American hero. G.I. Joe is there. It's G.I. Joe against Cobra and Destro, fighting to save the day. He never gives up, he's always there, fighting for freedom over land and air. G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe is there.
G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world.
He never gives up, he'll stay till the fight's won. G.I. Joe will dare. G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe.
I was going to say, before we do the Cobra one, do you want to play the other one with General Hawk? Because there is a line change.
All right. You can point. Let's see if we can catch it. I'm not sure.
Are we making a Venn diagram?
Yeah, we can. Because there's definitely, when I was listening to it, I was like, wait a minute.
Yo, Joe! He'll fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there. G.I. Joe, American hero. G.I. Joe is there. It's G.I. Joe against Cobra, the enemy, fighting to save the day. He never gives up, he's always there, fighting for freedom over land and air. G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe is there.
So in that one, that was from the 89 series. Did you notice they cut out
Destro?
And then the part where I wouldn't want to call it the bridge, but the second part where the guy talks and it's like G.I. Joe. There's some versions of this where they call it the international heroes, not the American heroes.
Oh,
I guess depending where they showed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So why did Destro get demoted?
I don't know.
Or maybe it was an abject failure throughout the first, 3 seasons.
Yeah.
They're like, dude, you're sitting on the bench a little bit. We're gonna let some other bad guys take over.
anyone wants to see these videos again, you go on YouTube. The first one we did, you search G.I. Joe, Real American Hero, 1983 miniseries. All right, so
I
this
say we
is
play the movie, which is a
Yeah,
banger.
well, it's a cinematic masterpiece.
Yes.
Already it's better.
the lyric.
Crashing through the sky comes a fearful cry. Cobra. Cobra. Armies of the night, evil taking flight. Cobra. Cobra. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, panic spreading far and wide. Who can turn the tide? G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe. Fighting for freedom wherever there's trouble over land and sea and air. G.I. Joe is there.
That was a long one.
Yeah, I don't remember it being that long, but
No.
that's a banger.
It is.
Because it
You
has
know
like
what,
a story involved.
Yeah, watching that, I was like, oh, I always wanted one of those trouble bubbles.
Yeah. Well, watching that, I'm like, okay, I'll watch the G.I. Joe movie again, right? It's on YouTube.
Yes. We do have to play the DIC series because they just ruined it. We don't have to play the G.I. Joe Renegades one because that theme song is lame as well. These versions of G.I. Joe,
Oh, it already sounds good.
Yo, Joe, got to get tough. Yo, Joe, you know you got to stand tall when it comes down to the wire. You got to play rough when you cross that line of fire. You got to have guts to stand for your rights. You got to keep a grip on it, to hold on tight. You got to do the fighting with all of your might.
Look at the way they're running.
Keep the target straight ahead in your sights. Got to get tough. Yo, Joe. Got to get tough. Yo, Joe. G.I. Joe, America's top secret mobile strike force team. Yo, Joe. The mission.
it's not
Lame.
terrible. It just doesn't hit the same. But that is when the series, the animation fell.
Just watching them run in the opening, you're like, they cut the budget. Yeah.
For sure.
Yo, Joe.
Next up, PSA. Listen, the G.I. Joe animated series was known for the PSAs at the end of each episode as a way to teach a valuable lesson and reinforce positive behavior among its young viewers. Few key reasons that they did this. One was the educational value, social responsibility, because the 80s was often criticized for all the shows being way too commercial. Hasbro and the show's creators wanted to instill a sense of responsibility and good citizenship, so they tackled these issues that were relevant to kids. And building positive brand image. The PSAs helped to humanize the G.I. Joe characters, turning them into role models who cared about their young viewers' well-being, like Roadblock, Duke, Lady J. These characters appeared in these PSAs, and offered advice, helped to build a connection between the viewers and the characters beyond the action scenes.
I put the PSAs in here if you go to that slide, Jimmy, and it goes through a whole bunch of those ones. But to this day, like some of them like stick out into my mind. Like the whole one where there's the down power lines with Roadblock. There was 4 of them that I thought was particularly really funny. There's an episode of Shipwreck when he's talking about how to solve your problems instead of running away from them. If you go to 7 minutes and 8 seconds, I thought it was very comical.
I'm running away from home. My parents are mean. Where'll you go? I'm not sure, but I'll show them.
That's right. You'll show them how mean you can be.
Shipwreck!
Isn't it better to try to solve problems instead of running away from them?
I could try talking to my parents again.
Yeah, tell them how you feel. And remember, running away.
It leads nowhere. Now I know. And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe.
I thought that was comical.
Yeah.
I thought that was comical. And the other one that I constantly always refer to is Torpedoes, where it talks about when you fall into water. And I was like, and you do it like this with your legs, and you scissor kick with your legs.
That is the one I completely remember because I can't swim. And if I was ever in danger, that's 100% what I'm going to do, because I did not forget that one. And eating a candy bar before the big game is not a good decision. I used to play pickup basketball with Mr. McDonald, and we maybe hit like a deli or something on the way to the court, and we would never grab a candy bar because that's ridiculous.
No, I would never eat a Snickers right before for that immediate candy sugar rush.
You got to eat
never
that
do
apple.
It was hard guarding McDonald out there. I need to be ready, so I can't eat that. I was warned. No, these were good. I loved it. My thoughts about it is I had to do some research about it because I was curious. And everything that we have and Mr. G pulled up is true, but I forgot. Did you know that there was someone who was in charge of this? They reached out, and these public service announcements for G.I. Joe specifically was run and overseen by a Harvard professor. His name was Robert Selman, and he was a specialist in early childhood development and psychology, and he was in charge of every one of these, and it had to get past his desk before they would approve the animation of the episode.
My favorite one is because it's one that I actually got to use in real life. It was the one that taught you how to stop a bloody nose.
That was Footloose.
Yeah.
And I put question marks on that because I was like, is that how you're supposed to do it? I didn't remember.
I will tell you, Mr. G, it works because look, I am the youngest. I have two brothers, and it would be chaos. At one time, I got a bloody nose, and I was like, wait, I know how to fix this. All right, hit it, Mr. Richardson.
You okay? My nose is bleeding. Put your head back.
That's the wrong play.
Footloose.
Pinch your nose closed and lean forward. If it doesn't stop in 5 minutes, we'll pack your nose with gauze and pinch it closed for 10 more minutes. If it's still bleeding, then see a doctor.
The bleeding stopped. Now we know how to stop a nosebleed.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
So yeah, I got a bloody nose, and I was like, because somebody said, "Oh, pinch your nose and go back," and I'm like, "Nuh-uh."
Not what Footloose said.
Yeah, tell that to Dr. Footloose.
Yeah. So the two PSAs that kind of stood out after doing this research was there's one where Recondo tells you not to play in a refrigerator, but I didn't learn not to play in refrigerators from G.I. Joe. I learned from Punky Brewster. And to this day, one of my wife's friends, Jen, we talk about it all the time. And if we're driving on the road and we see a refrigerator without the doors taken off, we take a picture of it and we say, Cherry! in the text. And then sometimes we'll take a picture of one where the doors are off and we're like, oh, save Cherry's life. There's one where Barbecue talks about false alarms. And I texted you guys about this. I was in the car with my daughter and we had to pull over for emergency service vehicles. And she was asking me about it. And she said, well, what if someone pulls a fire alarm like to fake? And I was like, oh, you know it. And I was like, before I said, I was like, wait a minute. And I quickly YouTubed it for her and she watched it. She's like, she looked at me and said, well, now I know. And then I responded with, and knowing is half the battle.
Well, and did you know that there became, in the 2000s, there became a giant parody of these G.I. Joe PSAs as well. Now, it's worth a Google on your own. I mean, we're not going to play them because some of them are not exactly language appropriate as well, but they are hysterical.
Yeah.
All right. So last thing before we move out of here, in my classroom, what I do is I'll have the kids record how-to videos. So let's say we've learned how to do rounding. They'll go out in front of the room. I'll use my phone to make a short video. Hey, I don't know how to round. Can I help? Sure. They'll turn to him, Jacob, and he walks in. I know how to round, and they'll do I kid you not. They'll do the rounding, and then and so I did this for a couple of years, and I'll post it in the Google Classroom in like a little area. So when they're home and they don't know how to do the homework, they can watch the video of Jacob or Jace or doing them. Okay, cool. I redo it every year as we get new kids. Just quick little thing. It ends with, and now I know. And then they look at each other and go, and now you know, and point to the camera. But it really is, and now you know, and knowing's half the battle. I had to pivot off of it.
That's so you don't violate any copyrights?
No, yeah. I just wanted to make it more like they're talking to the audience. But now that I see this again, I think I'm going to switch the rest of them for the year. We go, now I know. And knowing's half the battle. Mr. Richardson. I don't know, whatever. But
I just end with the Yo Joe.
It's always a kid going, wait a minute, I don't know how to do division. Look, Ariana. And she just walks in. I've been doing it for 4 or 5 years now, or since Google Classroom, really. Yeah. And I never thought about how I introduce it just like this. I never thought G.I. Joe. they say the kid's name in a weird voice as they come in, and now I'm realizing where I took that part of it from. So
yeah, your accidental thievery where you're like, oh,
what are
this
you
is
gonna
where that came from.
I'm not making money off it. They can't do anything.
Not with that attitude.
I know.
Yo, Joe!
All right, so our next center is we're going to talk about the G.I. Joe animated movie. Now, the G.I. Joe animated movie came out in 1987, and it was initially intended as a theatrical release, but G.I. Joe the movie ended up being a direct video following the underperformance of other Hasbro films like Transformers the movie. The movie revealed that Cobra Commander was part of a secret ancient society called Cobra La, which was seeking to overthrow all of humanity. The movie is notable for its kind of darker themes, including the near death of Duke, which was originally supposed to be a real death, but it was kind of pushed to he still survived because of the death of Optimus Prime in Transformers was not received very well. Fans have mixed opinions on the film, particularly due to the introduction of Cobra La, and it strayed from the military realism of the series that kind of grounded it into like at least normal-ish action. So, Charlie, any thoughts about the movie?
So yes, as a kid, I watched this on TV, and they broke it up just like a miniseries. And I remember when they first introduced the whole Cobra La thing and the Cobra, la, la, la. I was like, what am I watching?
Wait, do that one more time, Charlie.
No. I just remember being like, what is going on with G.I. Joe? Like, I just remember as a kid distinctly being like, I don't know if I like
bridge
this.
too far.
Yeah, like Serpentor Arise was like awesome. That whole miniseries.
You know that still
awesome.
to this day, that's the reason that I know what deoxyribonucleic acid is.
Exactly. That was definitely something I thought was a little bit too far. But this is where we got some of those new characters like Lieutenant Falcon, Chuckles, Jinx, and the introduction of the second introduction of Sergeant Slaughter, because he was in the Serpentor Arises series. But in the end, I just rewatched this movie for this episode, and it was okay. I liked it. I thought that in terms of G.I. Joe and sci-fi, the whole mass, that they still had the whole MacGuffin of the mass device, which it was the broadcast energy system device.
Yes.
That had the heat, the spores, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
So it still had all of the regular G.I. Joe tropes in it, except with the introduction of Cobra La, which was really weird.
Yeah. Now, when I was a kid, I never realized how far they were straying from the military aspect and went a little bit more sci-fi. That wasn't the problem for me. My problem was they lacked the courage to actually kill Duke. Because I remember seeing this after Transformers the movie, and they killed Optimus Prime, and that was like a legit moment when you're a kid, and you're like, I'm kind of grieving.
I think I cried when I watched the cartoon when Duke died.
Yeah,
because
and then
they show him dying, and then at the end they kind of retrofit it.
Yeah, and then they're like, it's like at the end they're like, Duke miraculously got better.
Yeah,
it's like somehow Palpatine returned. You know,
it's like a walkie-talkie message where it's like dubbed over.
Yeah,
because at the end
doesn't match the words.
Yeah, and at the end it doesn't make sense because they look up at the sky and there's a whole line about Duke is watching over us and he's in the constellation as if he's dead, but he's really not.
Yeah, and that's just from a storytelling perspective, even as a kid, I'm like, you cowards.
Okay, I completely disagree with you. It'd be fun to disagree on the point right now. They had to keep Duke alive. As everyone knows, they killed Optimus Prime. The backlash cost them millions. To be that dumb to do it twice, and that's why they retroactively did it. What happened was they caught way too much for Optimus, and then they told them immediately, you need to fix this. Duke cannot die in this cartoon before it airs on TV. So then they had to find a way. There's no money to reanimate. The best they could do was throw in a tagline at the end, and that was a decision they made immediately. And that is the smart adult decision. If you
it's a smart business decision. I'm saying from a storytelling perspective, Jimmy, you're the man who's always about story. And then all of a sudden, they're looking at Duke in the sky, like kind of mourning him. And they're like, he lived.
I think it's perfect. It's fine. I'm good. They shouldn't have killed him. Shouldn't have killed Prime. We're not going to kill the Duke thing.
Well, see, I wouldn't comparing Optimus Prime to Duke. Optimus Prime is the face of Transformers,
but so
Duke is not the face of Transformers.
Duke was the face of G.I. Joe.
I mean, of G.I. I disagree.
He was the
No,
leader.
Duke was.
Snake Eyes was the by far the most
Snake Eyes
popular.
was Wolverine, but he wasn't the leader, and he wasn't the one you looked to make decisions. He didn't say anything. He just had the coolest moment.
No, I didn't say that. I just said the face. So if you poll 100 GI Joe watchers and you say think of your first GI Joe character, are they going to say Duke?
No, it's definitely Snake was the coolest.
Snake Eyes,
not Snake.
The cartoon show.
Snake Eyes was the coolest.
Cartoon show. Duke was the face of that show.
But correct. No, Duke
Snake
was
Eyes was
in
doing
charge.
stuff
He was
around
the
the
leader.
background.
Right.
Who?
Duke is more replaceable than Optimus Prime.
I agree with that statement.
They should have just killed him.
No, they shouldn't have. That's dumb. Why make a dumb mistake twice? Listen, my thought on this is simple. The movie, I thought it was great. I don't care that it went fantasy. I'm always a big fan of when characters reach that moment where the world is different than they expected. Whether it's Tony Stark seeing aliens for the first time in that Avengers movie and that look of like, wow, this is different for everything. To them suddenly encountering aliens and like they're a military organization. It's based in reality, and suddenly the world just shifted in front of them. And my favorite part of that is what Tony Stark did. And what the G.I. Joe team was like, all right, let's go. And it just went right to put on you. Let's strap up. Let's make it work. And they went, there was no like, oh my God, it's aliens. What are we going to do? They just went to work. That's what I like too. And I wasn't around for the moon landing, if it happened or not. Kennedy, shot things. I wasn't there. But if there's a moment I remember is the opening theme to the G.I. Joe movie. I know where I was standing, where I watched it. I have to say this because I couldn't say it in the last segment. The animation was, because we didn't get a chance to get to it. The animation was the cleanest thing I'd ever seen in the 80s at that point. That
you could tell what they spent money on it. Yeah.
Tons of money. The camera angles were ridiculous because they've never used those angles.
It was cinematic,
before.
yeah.
Yeah, they never used those angles before in any episode or even in the movie. The theme song was obviously amped up. And it's me. They told a complete story in that minute intro, from the idea that Cobra was coming to blow up the Statue of Liberty. G.I. Joe clearly knew about it because they were waiting for them. You see Cobra commander plant the bomb. You see Duke get the bomb at the end, drop it off, blow their ship up. They told the whole story to minute 30, and everybody was in it. Every character had a moment. The Alpine thing was ridiculous. Bazooka almost shooting Shipwreck's head off, and then accidentally hitting the things behind him, which is classic Bazooka. From Scarlet, Stalker made an appearance to even the new ones. That made it one of the greatest things I've ever seen. The movie I love too. I love the aspect of it, the history behind it, how they gave an origin. They pushed the envelope more than anyone thought they would for G.I. Joe. And so I'm good with the fact, they were too coward to kill Duke. They turned Cobra Commander to a snake and pointed out monsters exist and all these things. I mean, they pushed the envelope. So I'm good with that.
Yo, Joe!
Next segment.
Live action movies.
So we had about 3 live action movies so far. G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra. This movie came out in 2009. It involves Duke, played by Channing Tatum, because, he's the face of the show, and Ripcord, played by Marlon Wayans, and they both join the International Military Unit to stop Cobra from using nanotechnology-based weapons. It grossed $302.5 million on a budget of $175. Then you have G.I. Joe Retaliation, came out in 2013. The sequel saw G.I. Joe framed as traitors and nearly wiped out by a Cobra-controlled government.
And that's the one where they actually killed Duke.
Yes. And then they regretted it immediately.
I disagree. Because then
no. What do you mean disagree? I'm telling you, Channing Tatum blew up between the first movie and the second movie. And then by the time, because his Magic Mike, whatever it is, came out in between.
Right.
So now they already filmed G.I. Joe Retaliation. He gets killed early on, and they realize they made a terrible mistake because he's incredibly popular. So then they went back and reshot scenes where him and The Rock are hanging out for 6 or 7 minutes to get him in the movie more, because they should not have cut him from the film. He wasn't popular in the first movie. They've just all said they regretted it, but it is what it is. Again, budget of $130, $375, almost similar to what the other one did. And 2021, you had the Snake Eyes origin story.
So I actually never watched the first G.I. Joe movie. I did watch G.I. Joe Retaliation just recently, and I turned it off after a half hour because the idea of Roadblock becoming the leader over Flint was like, you got to be kidding me. I'm not watching this anymore. I'm sorry. I'm out. There's no way Roadblock takes over G.I. Joe when Flint is standing right there. And even Lady J would be way more qualified than Roadblock to take over G.I. Joe.
I agree. They messed up only, and I won't say they messed up. Channing Tatum wasn't as popular when that first movie came out. He blew up with the Magic Mike series in between after they filmed the second movie. If they had kept him in with The Rock, you may have like a little buddy cop thing or whatever with the G.I. Joes, it would have worked better. Instead,
but this is, to me,
this is what happens.
Like
when you switch mediums, it does change a little bit, but I think they made a mistake with that.
Based on the ego of The Rock. This was like his movie, his vehicle. He wanted the spotlight, and you could like completely tell. Like that's what this was, this movie. And I didn't like it.
Yeah, I mean, look, these movies were fine. I saw the first one, I saw the second one, and I did not see Snake Eyes, but the fact that he spoke the entire time, I was like, I'm never going to see this movie. That's not my Snake Eyes.
Exactly. I didn't like a single one of the movies. I did not like any of them.
They made, other than Snake Eyes, they made a decent amount of money. I mean, they were profitable.
I just didn't like them.
I will tell you this, though. The Snake Eyes uniform is dope. But the fact that he talks is dumb.
Yo, Joe!
All right, last station, the comics. G.I. Joe appeared in many different forms, and this is the comic form, which was interesting, of course. The comic began 1982 to 1994 by Marvel Comics. That was the big one. Larry Hama was in charge. He was also part of the toy line. He actually wrote most of the cards that were on the back of the characters. Ran for 155 issues. At some point, the comic was selling more than the X-Men. It was really, really huge. I actually want to go back and dig into it again. Went away for a little bit. In 2001 to 2008, Devil's Due Publishing owned the rights to it, and they did their own version of the G.I. Joe. Continuing from where Marvel left off, it ran for about 43 issues. It acknowledged the events from the Marvel run, updated the characters a little bit, and it also had its first G.I. Joe Transformers crossover. And IDW Publishing currently has it now since 2008. Larry Hama is back with it. They revived it with issue 155 and a half, taking place after the first one. That's a brilliant move. They rebooted it. They had three main comics, and I read these three comics. A G.I. Joe comic, which is the main series. G.I. Joe Origins, which explores like the backstory of each one, like an episode of Lost. And G.I. Joe Cobra, which was Chuckles undercover in Cobra.
Only for the first 4 episodes.
Only the first 4 episodes, but that's how they found out about Cobra. He was undercover with them, and then you were just in the world of Cobra with one Joe. They cross over with Street Fighter, $6 Million Man. The comics were out there. They're intense. I love them. Guys, thoughts on the comics?
So my first G.I. Joe comic that I actually picked up was on the recommendation from Mr. Richardson. You were talking, this was 2000, and you were like, yo, this is G.I. Joe comic, and it's coming back out of retirement. And you're like, it's really funny because Bazooka is too fat and out of shape, so they don't have him back re-enlist. I thought that was funny. And plus the artwork in that one is really nice. But I'm currently reading the Energon universe, which has their backstories. But let me tell you, Cobra Commander is that character, like growing up as a kid, you're like, he always loses. He doesn't really do anything. But he like gets into why he's Cobra Commander. And I was like, oh, he's actually a pretty kind of bad guy. That, and the most interesting thing that I never thought about, but it bothered me as a kid, was why did G.I. Joe have lasers that shot like, blue and red? And this comic series answers it.
So what is the reason?
Energon. Cobra Commander finds Energon.
Yeah, but why are the bad guys red and the good guys blue?
I don't know. But he harnesses the power of Energon, just like in, was that Captain America?
Yeah.
For his solo movie? Was it just called Captain America?
Yeah.
Where they harvest the Tesseract to make weapons?
Right.
Cobra Commander figures out a way to harvest Energon and put it into weapons. And then Destro uses it to power the bats. I don't really like the history of it because, like, it's weird how the bats were the first, like, kind of, I don't know, it's interesting. But I did learn something. Destro's first name Never knew he had a first name until I read that.
What is his first name?
Chris.
Lair.
Oh, I thought you were going to say like Steve. All right, interesting. All right,
Thoughts on the
Mr.
comic?
Richardson, I'll give you a little time to cook before I do mine. So you go.
I'll be short. One of my favorite comics is there's a classic comic where the Joes actually die and get killed, literally slaughtered. In the comics, and in the cartoon, people jump out of the plane last minute, no one dies. The comic was the basic what happened in the comic. The Crimson Twins, Tomax and Xmon, has captured a bunch of Joes. Zaymont, sorry, has captured a bunch of the Joes, reaches out to Cobra Commander and said, "What do we do with them?" And Cobra Commander says, infamously in the comic, "Get rid of them. Just get rid of them." He's like, and they go, I need that in writing. What do you want to do? Just get rid of them. He's like, okay. They hang up, and Cobra Commander's like, listen, we got to get rid of them. We don't want the Joes on us, as in let them go. They misinterpreted as in literally get rid of them. So then Tomax and Xmon go back to the crew and say, listen, he said to get rid of them. Who wants to do it? And none of the Cobras want to murder them. They're in a pit at this point. They're in like a hole.
Issue 109. It's called Death in the Desert.
So one of the Saw Vipers there and says, I'll do it. They're trying to climb out. It's literally Doc finally gets to the top because they're lifting each other up to get out of this hole they're in. The Saw Viper's right there, blows Doc away in the head and starts shooting at all the G.I. Joes in there. He kills Doc, Heavy Metal, Thunder, and Crankcase. Eventually, quick kick throw. I remember the comic. He throws something, stops the Saw Viper, like a knife or something he has. They get out. They try to escape. And they steal one of those tanks, and as they're escaping, they blow up the tank. So Breaker, Crazy Legs, and Quick Kick get murdered. And there's just a few Joes left. I can't remember who survives, and then the other Joes come save them. But they get slaughtered, and it leads to a civil war between Cobra. And the civil war between Cobra ends with Zartan taking out Serpentor in the comic, where he shoots an arrow across a battlefield and just takes him in the eye. It all stems off of this battle that ends like... because some of them are upset it happened. The others like, yo, we don't murder like this. It was just pretty crazy. But that's one of the things I remember from the comic run. McDonald.
Yeah, I read this one as well because I feel like Mr. Richardson probably said, yo, you got to read this.
It's crazy.
It was nuts. Now, my favorite comic actually came from the later series, the IDW. It's the, what is it? I'm sorry. It's, G.I. Joe Cobra. And, Mr. Richardson spoke about it as well. It's kind of a darker take. And I really, really enjoyed, Mr. Richardson kind of mentioned it already, the first 4 episodes. I keep saying episodes. The first 4 issues that focused on Chuckles. For those who don't know, Chuckles he's an undercover G.I. Joe guy. And I don't know why his character, he's undercover. They're trying to make him blend in, so he's wearing a bright Hawaiian shirt, and you're just like, okay. But I feel like this was an interesting take. He goes undercover for Cobra. And ready, I'm just gonna read the description to you for this issue. Hawk assigns Chuckles to deep undercover and attempt to learn more about Cobra. To this end, he becomes the Joe's undercover contact, with his only contact that knows that he's actually still working for the Joes is Jinx. However, Cobra knows that that this is his identity from the start, and Chuckles gets manipulated by Tomax and Zaymont to become isolated and depressed. He meets with Cobra Commander, who reveals the charade and is invited to join Cobra. Chuckles actually agrees and uses the opportunity to get closer to Cobra Commander. When he gets the chance, he kills Cobra Commander and then detonates a nuclear bomb on one of Cobra's main installations, killing himself and Zaymont in the process. And what was so interesting about this comic is you're like, all right, he's going to end up A, getting rescued, B, he's going to still be a G.I. Joe. And all it is a series of it reminded me of how people become Sith. They don't do it in one decision. It's like 15 tiny decisions. And you kept seeing him like, all right, okay, he's going to get rescued. He's going to, ultimately side with the G.I. Joes, and then he doesn't, and it was a very dark but very realistic depiction of being undercover. It was super fascinating. I really liked it.
Interesting.
All right, guys, it's time to wrap this episode up. It's been a long time coming. I have some facts. I did some research. Surprisingly, though, some of the stuff I have listed, we kind of jumped into a little bit. couple of facts, couple of wrap-ups. I'm going to give you some information, and you guys get to react to it. First thing I was able to find was the amount of established writers they had on the cartoon. One of the main writers was Ron Fieldman. He worked on Starsky and Hutch, Fantasy Island. He wrote some of the cartoon episodes. And some comic greats like Denny O'Neil, Mark Wolfram, Steve Gerber, who co-created Howard the Duck, also wrote the cartoon. There were a lot of prominent writers writing on the cartoon series. We talked about Optimus Prime as the reason Duke wasn't killed. They caught too much slack, the fate, because everyone was complaining, the amount of letters. And it literally said in the article I pulled up, they had already finished the movie. Duke took an apparently mortal wound, like we said, and they even mentioned Joe's crying and looking towards the heavens. And they said, listen, you're all going to be fired unless you insert some dialogue, because we are not catching this. So many people got fired with the Optimus Prime thing. Listen, don't vote against yourself and your own self-interest. And G.I. Joe coined the term action figure, which we already discussed as well. G.I. Joe Order the Battle was a 4-issue miniseries that started in December 1986. And it listed all the various G.I. Joe operatives and Cobra agents. It's like one of those books with all the information. In the second issue, Rocky was in it because they had negotiated almost to the end that he was going to be a character in it. But when the license fell through, they didn't communicate to the comics, so he's in the book anyway. Later issues, they cut him out when he reprinted it, but he was briefly in it as a member of the G.I. Joe team. Rocky was supposed to join them. I mentioned the public service announcements and the person who was in charge of it.
You know what, Mr. Richardson? I wonder if that's. I think that the parent that Derek had, when his email, he had commented one of his characters was Big Boa, who was a boxer, but he was on the Cobra side. I wonder if that was
what they did later.
Yeah, because he wore a helmet, so you couldn't see who he was, but he was a muscular guy with boxing gloves.
Do you guys remember the G.I. Joe cereal?
Yeah.
All right. That was, yes. I didn't remember it either. Mr. G was like, I already had it.
My parents would never buy sugary cereal, so I'm sure I never had it.
That was like the one thing my mom, for whatever reason, she would buy. She wouldn't buy it if it had marshmallows, but like she bought all that other stuff.
From Action Stars cereal, the cereal featured multiple boxes, each with a different G.I. Joe character on it in an action pose, so it wasn't just one normal box. Also, we know G.I. Joe owns his existence to Barbie, obviously. GI stands for government issue. That's what that stands for.
See, I always thought it was general infantry.
No, it's general issue.
Because the G.I. Joe name itself was based on a 1945 American war film called The Story of G.I. Joe.
It's kind of like John Doe. So you're just a general issue Joe, meaning, you're part of the war machine. Just get, part of the meat grinder war machine.
And again, 4 original G.I. Joe action figures came out in 1964. And in 1965, the Black Soldier came out as well. And the first G.I. Joe toy had 21 points of articulation that Mr. G mentioned as well. And that is it.
I have one, Mr. Richardson. I was just seeing if you had it. Do you guys know the character Tunnel Rat? He's a G.I. Joe.
Yep. Yes, he was from the movie. He was introduced in the movie.
He was based on Larry Hama.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was he a Vietnam?
Yeah, Larry Hama was a military guy. He was a Vietnam guy. And that's why the comics were so accurate and really depicted military, serious kind of things. And I guess the G.I. Joe cartoon, as it's kind of veered away, Larry Hama is just like, what to do with that?
Yeah, that's when he was part of he was in like basic training with Beachhead. He was a new recruit. Tunnel Rat, Jinx, Chuckles, and the basketball player. I don't remember his name, Slam Dunk or
something like that. Yeah. But he's even modeled. He looks just like Larry Hama as well.
Oh.
You guys know about Bullet Man?
No.
So superhero craze was picking up a little bit, so they invented the weirdest G.I. Joe ever called Bullet Man. They added him to the lineup. He was in some of the catalogs, but collectors hated him because his enemy was a caveman from outer space. It just didn't fit. So they stopped making him, but apparently he's considered very valuable because they did not make too many of him.
Oh, he's part of their adventure series.
Oh, look at him. He looks like Peacemaker.
Yeah, he really does.
He didn't make it. All right, guys, that's the G.I. Joe show. All 1 hour and 45 minutes of it, but
Ooh, it was a lot.
I thought we were going to go 3 hours. I wasn't joking.
Yeah. This is a big one. There's a lot of stuff to cover. 60 years of G.I. Joe. You can't do that in a half hour.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, Olive's dad, for setting us down this rabbit hole of almost 2 hours of G.I. Joe. And for David Owens, too, for also getting Sergeant Slaughter to now be a friend of the show. I'm going to reach out to him the second we're done. See if he'll actually come on. Hopefully, fingers crossed. All right, but we got to get out of here. The bus is in the park a lot. For Mr. G, for Mr. McDonald, my name is Richardson, Mr. For Mr. G and Mr. McDonald, my name is Mr. Richardson. I botched my own name. Thank you so much for joining us. And now you know, and knowing's half the battle. Someone yell, yo, Joe.
Yo,
Joe.
Let's go. See you guys next time.
Now I know. And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!